to be. All right, we're going to take a look at a couple of scriptural examples of some good moms. All right, some good mom scriptural examples. Turn with me to 1 Samuel chapter 1. 1 Samuel chapter 1. Usually on Sunday night of Mother's Day, like Mother's Night, right? I'll preach a message on the value of a name, and I'll go through and tell you what the name of some of the women in the Old Testament, what the name means, and then I would look your name up. I had a problem though; I couldn't remember everybody's name that was here. To be able to look it up, and and it's been going for a long time. Yeah, there's three things that go. The first one's the memory, and the other two, I forgot what the other two were. All right, 1 Samuel chapter 1, starting verse number 20. The mother that we're looking at here is Hannah. Hannah had prepared her son to be a servant of the Lord. 1 Samuel chapter 1, verse number 20. We're going to kind of get this in the middle of the account. She has already prayed in the temple. Eli, the high priest, tried to rebuke her, and she's like, no. I'm not as one of those drunken women. I'm praying, pouring out my heart to the Lord for a man-child. And I'm just praying, and if God gives me a man-child, then I'm going to give him back. And so that has already happened. Verse number 20, wherefore it came to pass when the time was come about after Hannah had conceived, that she bare a son and called his name Samuel, saying, because I have asked him of the Lord. And the man Elkanah, that's her husband, and all the house went up to offer unto the Lord the yearly sacrifice and his vow. But Hannah went not up, for she said unto her husband, I will not go up until the child be weaned, and then I will bring him, that he may appear before the Lord, and there abide forever. And Elkanah, her husband, said unto her, do what seemeth thee good. Tarry until thou have weaned him. Only the Lord establish his word. So the woman abode and gave her son suck until she weaned him. And when she had weaned him, she took him up with her with 3 bullocks, 1 ephah of flour, a bottle of wine, and brought him unto the house of the Lord in Shiloh. And the child was young. And they slew a bullock and brought the child to Eli. And she said, O my Lord, as thy soul liveth, my Lord, I am the woman that stood by thee here praying unto the Lord. For this child I prayed, and the Lord hath given me my petition which I asked of him. Therefore also I have lent him to the Lord. As long as he liveth, he shall be lent to the Lord. And he worshiped the Lord there. Now, does anybody recognize the name of the child? Samuel. Was Samuel anybody? Can you name one thing that Samuel did? Hewed? Hewed what? Yes, he hewed Agag. Wasn't it Agag? Yeah, he hewed Agag. What meaneth the lowing? And the king, the Lord said, utterly destroy. Saul brought back the people. Saul, he didn't bring the people. He brought back the best of the flocks, and he brought back the king. And Samuel hewed the king into pieces. All right, what's another thing that Samuel did? Anybody? He anointed kings, didn't he? He anointed Saul, number one. Who's the second one? David. So since he anointed kings, what does that mean that Samuel was the last of? Yeah, judges or prophets. Well, not prophets, because we see prophets. But the last of the judges. So Samuel was kind of an important guy, right? And how did he come into being? His mama prayed for him. His mama prayed for him, and then his mama gave him up. You know how hard it is for a mother to give up a child and leave the child at the temple at this time, under the care of Eli? That was hard. But she didn't leave him under the care of Eli. Who did she leave him under the care of? I lent him to the Lord. And what a mom. You know, that's what we ought to do with our children anyways, mothers. Soon to be mothers. Lord willing, soon to be mothers. The children belong to the Lord, and you ought to give them to the Lord. It doesn't matter how long you have them for. You know, we read about that this morning. Some are taken in a miscarriage. Some are taken even before they're born. Some of them are taken as a miscarriage. Some of them die young. As long as you have them, you ought to be praying and give that child to the Lord. That's what you ought to do. Dads, you ought to support them in that. What did Elkanah do here? Do what seemeth to thee good. Support the wife in that decision. If she wants to give the child to the Lord, you back her up on that. You back her up on that. All right, another set. We saw this set this morning and these verses, but I've got another avenue I want to take with them. This is Lois and Eunice, grandma and mother to Timothy. All right, like I said, we saw the verses this morning. We'll look at them again. 2 Timothy chapter 1, verse number 5. 2 Timothy chapter 1, verse number 5. When I call to remembrance the unfeigned faith that is in thee, Paul again is speaking to Timothy, which dwelt first in thy grandmother Lois and thy mother Eunice, and I am persuaded that in thee also. Right? And then in 2 Timothy chapter 3 and verse 15, and that from a child thou hast known the Holy Scriptures, which are able to make thee wise unto salvation through faith which is in Christ Jesus. How did Timothy, or what did Lois and Eunice teach Timothy specifically? But specifically in the Scriptures. I mean, look at it, what it says here. Which has made thee wise unto salvation. Now, had the Romans Road been written yet? So Lois and Eunice couldn't have taught the Romans Road to them, right? Are there any scriptures in the Old Testament that speak about salvation? Well, let me show you one. Right? Let me show you one. Go to Isaiah chapter 53. Isaiah chapter 53. We'll start in verse number 1 to get the context, and we'll read down through verse number 12. Well-known verses, Isaiah 53, starting in verse number 1. These are some pretty well-known verses. If you've been in the Scriptures for any amount of time, you've heard these. If you haven't heard these before, you're going to start hearing them from now on, because these are well-known Scriptures. Isaiah 53, starting in verse 1. Who hath believed our report, and to whom is the arm of the Lord revealed? For he shall grow up before him as a tender plant, and as a root out of a dry ground. He hath no form nor comeliness, and when we shall see him, there is no beauty that we should desire him. And so this is speaking of Jesus Christ. This is an Old Testament prophecy of Jesus Christ. So it says here that Jesus wasn't a handsome man. He was just a regular old Jew-looking guy. He is despised and rejected of men, a man of sorrows, and acquainted with grief, and we hid, as it were, our faces from him. He was despised, and we esteemed him not. Surely he hath borne our griefs and carried our sorrows. Yet we did esteem him stricken, smitten of God, and afflicted. But he was wounded for our transgressions, he was bruised for our iniquities, and the chastisement of our peace was upon him, and with his stripes we are healed. Do you guys remember the Passover? Christ in the Passover? The stripes, the piercing. Do you guys remember that of the matzah? Verse number 6. All we like sheep have gone astray. We have turned every one to his own way, and the Lord hath laid upon him the iniquity of us all. He was oppressed, and he was afflicted, yet he opened not his mouth. As he is brought as a lamb to the slaughter, and as sheep before her shearers is dumb, so openeth not his mouth. So he openeth not his mouth. Do you remember when he was being questioned by Pilate, and he answered him not? Guys, remember that? That was prophesied. Verse number 8, he was taken from prison and from judgment. And who shall declare his generation? For he was cut off out of the land of the living. For the transgression of my people was he stricken. And he made his grave with the wicked and with the rich in his death, because he had done no violence, neither was any deceit in his mouth. Whose grave was he, or whose sepulcher was he buried in? Joseph of Arimathea. He was a rich man. Verse number 10, yet it pleased the Lord to bruise him. We ought to meditate on that for a while. This is God the Father beating God the Son. For what? For you and for me. It pleased the Lord to bruise him. He hath put him to grief. When thou shalt make his soul an offering for sin, he shall see his seed, he shall prolong his days, and the pleasure of the Lord shall prosper in his hand. These are the two verses that I want you to think about, verses 11 and 12. He shall see the travail of his soul. He shall be satisfied. Satisfied with what? With the sacrifice of Jesus Christ. By his knowledge shall my righteous servant justify many, for he shall bear their iniquities. Therefore will I divide him a portion with the great. He shall divide the spoil with the strong, because he hath poured out his soul unto death, and he was numbered with the transgressors, and he bare the sin of many, and made intercession for the transgressors. What is it that Jesus is doing right now for you and for me? He's making intercession for us. After he died on the cross and he was buried and rose again the third day, he sat down on the right hand of God, and he makes intercession for you and for me. That's the things. Those would be the things that Lois and Eunice was teaching Timothy. That's probably where Timothy got the idea of salvation, was through teachings like that. In Psalm chapter 22, it starts out, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? Does that sound familiar to anybody? That's what the Lord said. When God laid all the transgressions, our transgressions on him, that's the only time in the Scripture and ever in eternity did God the Son look at God the Father and say, my God, instead of referring to him as my Father. When did that happen? When your sin and my sin was placed on the shoulders of Jesus Christ. God the Son was separated from God the Father, and he cried out, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? Those would be things that Lois and Eunice had taught to young Timothy. Now, let's look at this virtuous woman again. Proverbs chapter 12 and verse 4. Proverbs chapter 12 and verse number 4. Man, you guys are going to get out early tonight. Yeah. Jeffrey, I'm sorry, you're going to have to work overtime out there. You're going to have to listen to the whole message here, and then you get to go out there. Proverbs chapter 4 and verse number 4, a virtuous woman is a crown to her husband, But she that maketh ashamed is as rottenness in his bones. Good thing, bad thing. Isn't that what Solomon did with the Proverbs? Good thing, bad thing. A virtuous woman is a crown to her husband. But she that maketh ashamed is as rottenness in his bones. You know, you can either lift your husband up or you can make yourself despised in the eyes of others. Did you hear that? That's coming from God, not from me. Don't get mad at me. Don't care right now. Don't get mad at me. I'm not saying it. I'm reading it. Now, you could have gotten mad at me this morning. And Lord willing, you're over that. Lord willing. I haven't heard from anybody yet saying, I'm still mad at you. But a virtuous woman is a crown to her husband. Ladies, you ought to strive to be a crown for your husband. He ought to be able to walk around with his chest puffed up saying, that's my woman. He ought to be able to do that. Don't make it the other way around, where he's cowered down, walking behind you saying, now, honey, now. All right, Proverbs 31. Let's talk about rubies. Proverbs 31, let's talk about rubies. I brought the numbers with me. I mentioned it this morning, and I was kind of close. Proverbs chapter 31 and verse number 10. Who can find a virtuous woman? For her price is far above rubies. And I did some looking up and digging in. And there's several different types of rubies. There's natural, and then there's lab grown. All right, we're throwing out lab grown because they didn't have labs back in the day that Solomon was speaking, okay? So we're getting rid of the lab grown. We're only speaking now about natural. Natural rubies are the more expensive. And then when you find one that is clear and it's red, those are the most valuable. One of those is valued at about $15,000 a carat. All right? And a carat weighs 0.00705,479 ounces. Not even an ounce. So, and really, there are 141.748 carats to an ounce. No. Yes. 141.748 carats to an ounce. $15,000 a carat. 1 ounce is 141. So what's 15,000 times 141? It's a heap, isn't it? 15,000. And we'll do 142 because it's like 0.748, right? 15,000 times 142. All right. So 1 ounce. Now, how many virtuous women weigh an ounce? All right? This is where I got in trouble. But then I found out, Alan was telling me, I found out I was 30 pounds light this morning on the American national average. All right, so there's 142 carats in 1 ounce. There's 16 ounces in a pound. And this morning I said 135 was the average that I actually wrote down 130. All right, so my math here is going to be for a virtuous woman who weighs 130 pounds. Okay? Now, if you weigh more than that, then your value is way higher. All right, because we're going by weight. I'm just saying. This is a time when weight is good. Maybe the only time, but I'm telling you that. So 142 ounces, carats is an ounce. 16 ounces in a pound, 130. So take the 2 million and something and multiply that by 16.
I think I would work through the whole thing.
Okay, don't go there yet. Do the 16, so we got 1 pound.
Okay.
What's that number? You shouldn't have gone ahead. Don't go ahead of the teacher, right? 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 All right, what's the number for 1 pound? Did you hear that? 34,080,000. 1 pound. All right, are there virtuous women that weigh a pound? We're already in the millions. 34 million? All right. That's 1 pound, 34 million. All right. Let's just go 130 pounds now. Go ahead. So what's that? $4.4 billion for a virtuous woman at 130 pounds. All right, now, look at the verse. Look at the verse. Who can find a virtuous woman, for her price is the same price as rubies? Is that what the verse says? No, it says far above, doesn't it? So if we're at an average, now like I said, this is where weight is good, because if you're more than 130, then you just add 34,080,000 on top of 4.4 billion. Okay, I'm not going to ask you what your weight is. We're not going to be going there. I'm a ruby. $4.4 billion. And according to God, a virtuous woman is worth so much more than that. Now, guys, how'd you like to get $4.4 billion just because you married her? Just because you got her? Hey. But far above $4.4 billion, ladies, you ought to not, and the only word that I've got in my mind is a Spanish word, because I'm going to preach in Spanish on Wednesday. You ought to not put yourself down. You ought to not think less of yourself than what your worth is. Look at your worth in God's eyes. Men, you ought to not think less of your wife than God does. Look at what God thinks. Now, this is only if you're a virtuous woman. If you're a nag, you're a hag, you're anything that rhymes with that, you ain't one. Wouldn't you? You're rottenness to the bones. All right. Now, of the two, which one would you like to be? All right. Of the two, in God's eyes, would you rather be seen as rottenness to the bones or far above 4.4 billion? What do you think? Ladies, we ought to strive to be virtuous women. We had 3 examples actually that we looked at today. Hannah would be considered one, Lois and Eunice. What did they do? They taught their children how to follow God. They taught their children how to follow God. We looked at this morning, if your children are out of the house, you can teach the younger women. God looks at you as a very valuable person. And you ought to look at yourself that way as well and strive to be that person. Strive to be that person. I'm going to end with an illustration. Have you ever heard the illustration of the 7 cow wife? Yes, I've told it before. This comes from an island nation. So one island father had a son, and another island's father had a daughter, and the son was looking at the daughter, and she was just plain. There's nothing special about her, not super intelligent. She would make a good wife, child bearer, that's about it. And the average dowry that a man would give for a woman was 1 cow. So the son would give the father of the daughter 1 cow for his wife. And so the dads make the exchange. They go on. The man marries the girl. And they invite the dad of the girl or the family of the girl over to their hut on their land, on their island, and invite him to come to dinner. And the daughter comes out, and she is stunning. Stunning. Beautiful. She walks with a poise. She speaks with intelligence. And the parents were just kind of stunned at the transformation of the daughter. And the moral of the story is, he didn't give 1 cow for the wife, he gave 7. Not because of who she was, but the worth of what he saw in her and wanted her to become. He gave 7 cows. Transformed her from forgettable to something unforgettable. From his vision, his point of view, his thoughts towards that girl. And it was a huge transformation. Guys, I know this sounds funny, but we ought to strive to have a 7-cow wife. Had nothing to do with her, had everything to do with him. Everything to do with him. Once she heard about that, then what did she do? Lived up to what a husband gave. Wow, you gave 7 cows for me? Well, I'm going to be a 7-cow wife. Her value is far above Ruby's. Let's strive to be that. That's how God the Father looks. Husbands, that's how we ought to look at her. In that same way. All right, questions, comments, anybody?